Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast, world history from 1450 till almost yesterday. This episode, Dead People Do Tell Tales. Lots and lots of terrible things in this class today. So we start with a trigger warning, because pretty much everything here is about the dehumanization of people. It is terrible to discuss. This is the hardest class I have to teach. It is terrible to hear. So be aware that we are talking about terrible stuff and people doing terrible stuff to each other. So we try to end on a bright note, but be aware if you don't like it, that's okay. You can pause it, you can leave, you can do what you need to do to stay safe. Remember, I always end with be safe. So if you need to do something to be safe, be safe. Just a trigger warning ahead of time. So, the Native American population from 1500 to 1600 in 100 years declined by 95%. The population of Mexico alone went from somewhere around 25 million to less than 2.5, to about 2 million people. Native Americans had been cut off from the old world, from the Eurasian African landmasses, by roughly 15,000 years, which means their immune system had been completely isolated and developed. It evolved completely differently than what was going on in the New World. The other thing is, Native Americans didn't have animals of labor like oxen. They didn't have pigs. They didn't have these animals that you hang out with a lot that you get diseases from. Most diseases come from animals. They cross over into people. They evolve, they mutate, and now they become deadly for people. So their immune systems were 15,000 years behind. And so the diseases that they didn't have immunity to, just colds, regular old colds, smallpox, which was the big killer, but also war and murder and overwork in the mines and the fields, killed 95% of the native population. It is a genocide of native culture. The Spanish had no interest, none, in maintaining Native American gods or governments or trade routes or languages or records. It is a complete replacement by Spanish Catholic European culture. Now, the English are even, in a way, worse. Because when they come in, they don't even bother with native culture. For all of our happy stuff about the first Thanksgiving and Native Americans and English getting together, basically America is a white space. Manifest Destiny is a white space conquering a non-white space, a non-white frontier. It is the push. Think about the way we tell the story. We start with little the Pilgrims, the Puritans in Massachusetts, right? And the capitalists in Virginia, right? Jamestown. And then it grows and it grows and it grows. And it pushes. It doesn't absorb those people. It doesn't bring in Native Americans. They don't marry into English culture. They don't all become citizens of the king. They don't. No. It is a white space growing as more and more white people move in, as more and more Europeans. Now, the white is in quotation marks because it meant different things at different times. But what it always meant was non-African, non-Native American. So white was not white as much as what it wasn't. We'll talk about that later. But that's the expansion. Whereas in the Spanish, they had more of a Catholic culture. And so there's this mixing. There's murder and destruction, but also a mestizo population, also a living with this kind of Spanish hacienda lord sort of idea. You also get the Catholic priests coming in, being, we have to save souls. We have to save these souls for God. We have to add them to the Catholic Church. So there's the Catholicism spreading. So there's at least an incentive not to murder and not to commit a genocide against all of the people. The culture, on the other hand, was seen as barbaric, destructive, uncivilized. And so it was a replacement of native culture with Spanish Catholic culture. So the death of 95% of your population, the death of all those people, is a labor crisis. Who is going to do all the hard work we talked about in our last episode that regular peasants don't want to do, regular people don't want to do, and certainly the rich and the famous of European society definitely are not going to, suddenly start chopping down sugarcane. And the response to the death of the Native Americans is African slavery. To replace native labor, and they replaced one humanitarian disaster with another. What's the result? 15 million people, 5 million deaths, trillions of dollars were created, but not given in any way, shape, or form to the people working. Capitalism is invented. 3 continents are utterly transformed and philosophically broken in order to do the amount of trauma to everybody that has to happen. The old philosophies don't work. We're going to get the Reformation. We're going to get the scientific revolution. We're going to get enlightenment. We're going to get the age of revolution. We are going to get 300 years of chaos trying to figure out what does the new world mean and how do we live in a world with it. New cultures are going to be created and extinguished. There's going to be progress, backlash, trauma, and violence. So much violence. The Americas, from Canada and the Inuit islands of ice, all the way down to south of Tierra del Fuego in the south, is a world of violence. Now, that is not new. There was violence beforehand, right? The Aztecs were violent. Mayan culture had war, right? These are not like peaceful hippies just hanging out and then all of a sudden the mean Europeans come. But you do have to understand that American culture, and by that I mean the Western Hemisphere, is a world of violence and always has been. And the Europeans showing up brought violence with them and committed violence as well, both against the Native Americans, against the Africans who they will enslave, but also against each other. There's violence upon violence upon violence. There is so much violence. Okay, so let's talk about slavery. Traditional slavery, the slavery you'll see in the Bible for the Greeks, for Rome, for Islam, for Africa, for India. Traditional slavery was war captives who worked for a conqueror. They were machines. They were not citizens. They were turned into machines. But the idea was, you should be dead, but you're not, so it's better than being dead. Though, read your Old Testament, read your Greeks, read your Romans, it's not always better being alive and a slave than being dead. The Romans especially industrialized slavery to the point that, like, the average slave in a Spanish mine lived 3 years. Like, if you were sentenced to that, or you were sentenced to the galleys of the ships, We are talking just mass violence and death and rape and just dehumanization on a massive scale. It's completely industrialized. The Romans, when they sacked Carthage in 146 BC, sold 50,000 people into slavery in a day. That's what the Romans could do. So war captives are the slaves. Fellow citizens really can't be slaves. Jews can't enslave fellow Jews. Now, you may be like, well, there's Romans could sell themselves into slavery. Yeah, but not really. Because it's a status and it's like a debt servitude, but you could also, Roman citizens could also get themselves out of it. They could just one day not be a slave. Someone paid off their fee, right? It's an economic transition. I'm not enough of a Roman historian to really get into the nitty-gritty of it, but they never stopped being Romans. They weren't dehumanized. They lost rights, yes, and it was certainly not pleasant. But if their wife came by the next day with $25,000 she borrowed from her father, boom, the dude's not a slave anymore. Whereas that's not real. That doesn't necessarily mean for everybody else. Jews can't enslave fellow Jews. So there's slavery in the Bible. It's okay. Right? In the world, in the laws of Moses, slavery is acceptable. Except you can't enslave a fellow Jew. Because Jews are equal to other Jews in the eyes of Yahweh, in the eyes of God. So Christians can't enslave other Christians. Jews can't enslave fellow Jews. Greeks really shouldn't enslave other Greeks, and there's practical reasons for that, though the Spartans do, and that's a problem for the Spartans. The Spartans are slave-holding Greeks of other Greeks, and that's a problem because Greeks don't like being slaves. They have that whole democracy, freedom, citizenship thing, and that is a problem for the Spartans from the very beginning that they do that. Romans can't really enslave fellow Romans, and if you do, it can't be long-term, certainly not intergenerational. Islam, by definition, you cannot enslave a fellow Muslim. Because again, like the Romans and like the Jews, like the Hebrews, you're all equal before the same law code. So there is in all of these the concept of manumission, that you can be freed, and if not you, your kids would be freed, and they could become citizens. So we see this happen to non-Hebrew societies, that they get absorbed in. The Hebrews conquer various different Canaanite peoples, the Edomites and the such, and they're not absorbed in the way the Romans make them Romans, but they enslave them, and over time they become, because they convert, and their kids will be freed, and the kids or the grandkids can become citizens. And so Rome equaled Christianity plus Islam, gave a duty of a member to convert. It was your duty to make those kids into a Christian, into a Muslim, and then make them into a citizen. It's your duty to spread the proper religion. So intergenerational slavery was a no-no. And that's important. That you might be a slave, but your kids wouldn't be. And your grandkids could be citizens. And in fact, in Rome, there's a series of steps, and they're all laid out in the law. And there's a series of, you have no rights, then you have some rights, then you're a citizen and you have all the rights. And it could go from generation to generation and move up into making citizens. This slavery into citizen is one of the largest ways Rome made new Roman citizens. New World slavery is chattel slavery, and it is vastly, vastly, and completely different. It breaks all of these traditions. You don't have to be a war captive. You could be a citizen and still become a slave. And there was no manumission, or manumission was so hard to get and so hard to keep that was almost impossible. And it's intergenerational. Chattel slavery is if you happen to have children, your children are automatically slaves. Their children will be slaves. Their children will be slaves. But once you are a slave, there is no escaping slavery. That is different. That is a status. Whereas the traditional slavery is about economics in a lot of ways. You could even make money as a slave. You could get tips. You could get, I don't know how old it works in a example by example, but the idea was you're a machine. You're not a person. But you could become a person. Whereas in New World slavery, you were a machine. And you were never going to be a person. And your kids were never going to be people. And their kids were never going to be people. So, Europeans needed to justify this because it is such a break with the way things were. One, there is no slavery in Europe. Christianity had come in, and that was the end of it. So in the Christian parts of Europe, there's no slavery. Two, it wasn't going to be Roman slavery. So they're breaking with the philosophy. They're breaking with the rules. So they're breaking with the tradition that there is no slavery, and they're breaking with the old school rules as well. So they needed to do something to justify something they know is terrible. And the first is they use Christianity. They're Christians. They're Christian crusaders. So they use Christianity. Hey, the Africans are not Christian. Remember, Christians can't own other Christians, can't enslave other Christians. Africans aren't Christian. Very nice. Two, philosophy. The Romans had rules for this. And hey, we'll follow them. We'll follow them. Even if we're thinking about breaking them, we could go back. We'll follow them. There's also part of this. The Africans have slavery. And they do. The Africans have the traditional form of slavery. Why? Because Africa is big and the population is small. So labor is incredibly important, incredibly valuable. So war was not about land. You can own 1 million acres of land and it wouldn't matter in Africa. That's how big Africa is. The land is unimportant if you don't have the people. So war was mostly over people. Okay. So the idea was, we'll just buy African slaves from Africans. That's not bad. We're not enslaving them. Ha ha. So we're not doing the bad part. And we'll, number 3, make them our black brothers. We'll turn them into Europeans. We will give them Christianity, reading, Europeanness. They will be black modern men. They'll be we will take African people and take them from Africa and Islam and backwardness, and we will make them us. That was the idea. Christianity plus philosophy plus progress. Was the slave trade an important industry? Yes. It was a massive industry. It is very possibly the biggest industry in Europe for 200 years. 300 years, possibly. It is very possible. If it is not bigger than sugar, it is certainly right there with it. It is so big that in 1833, when Britain's government ended slavery in the British Empire, They paid for manumission. They paid the owners of slaves to release their slaves. The British government basically bought all the slaves in the British Empire. It paid the equivalent of 4.25 billion pounds in 2023 money. That's a massive industry. And it fueled every other industry. The shipping and transportation. You got lumber and cloth and furniture and food and metal and glasswork. And that's just a ship to take people across the ocean. You needed the financial industry, which we've already talked about when we did sugar, stock companies to spread risk, insurance to protect investments, banking to supply loans for future profits. Mining, sugar, tobacco were all dependent on the labor. So they fed appetites back home, which grew. So there's always the need for more. There's always the need for more. There's always the need for more. Someone has to do the work, always, to feed the machine. Remember, sugar goes up 50 times in this period. Where are you getting the sugar from? People have to do the work. If it's going to increase, if output's going to increase 50 times, you need labor to increase as well. Mining. You want to talk about an insatiable appetite? From 1520 to 1815 is basically an unending amount of warfare. From the moment Martin Luther puts the 95 Theses on the door at Wittenberg until the final conquest of Paris by the Allies, there is essentially a continent completely engulfed at war. My period of Swedish history, which is the 1650s specifically, but it goes from essentially 1520 to 1720, 200 years. There's almost no year where the Swedes are not at war somewhere against someone. So it's an unending supply of mineral wealth, of silver, gold, metal, copper, iron, to feed the war machines, to feed the banking, to feed the coffers and bank accounts. Then in North America, there's tobacco. Did anyone feel bad about enslaving other humans? Yeah, lots of people. Plenty of people knew it was wrong. The most famous and the earliest is Las Casas, a Dominican priest. He starts with advocating for Native American rights. He goes to the New World and sees how terribly the Native Americans are being treated and advocates for their rights. These people have souls too. And initially, he's an advocate for African slavery, thinking that would help alleviate the treatment of Native Americans. And then he sees how terrible the Africans are treated, and he does the same thing. He goes, no. So he's basically one of the first people of this age advocating for universal human rights, that the human rights are universal just because you're human. Everyone deserves them. This is going to be one of our themes through the Enlightenment, through the Reformation, through the First World War, through the Second World War, to the right up until the end of communism, right up till today, right now. Who deserves rights? And one argument is everyone deserves them just because they're people. All people deserve rights. We're having this argument now. You just have to look at the newspaper. Go to TikTok. Who deserves rights? And who is having rights trying to be taken away from them? Louis XVI. Now we're jumping ahead a bit. But Louis XVI in the 1660s had what were called the Black Codes. They were protections for enslaved people. The idea was if you treat enslaved people better, you'll have less revolts and make more money. So Louisiana had a manumission system. Louisiana was under the French codes, so they had the Black Codes, and so 13% of the black population was free. Was free. And if 13% could be free, the idea was all of them could one day be free. Mississippi, the English colony right across the river, had less than 1% of its black population be free. So you can see a difference between the way the French do things and the way the English do things. And that English way of doing things will give birth to the American way of doing things. Third is African liberation groups in the New World. From the very beginning, African people said, I don't want to be a slave. I'm not going to put up with this. And they liberated themselves. They snuck away. They fought. They revolted. They got themselves, bought their independence, whatever it may be. They created independent freeman kingdoms in the New World. Places where Africans, non-Europeans, and liberal Europeans could all exist in a rejection of the system. One of our oldest portraits of the New World is Maroon liberated leaders in 1599. So right from the very beginning was a rejection of this system was built into the system by the people participating in the system. So did anyone feel bad about enslaving other human beings? Yes, a lot of people. Even Charles V, King of Germany and Spain, had questions. Guys, we're killing a whole lot of native people and enslaving African people. I am the king of the people who are doing all that killing and enslaving. What's going to happen to my soul with all this mass murder and slavery? Is Jesus going to be mad at me when I die? Because that's going to be a problem. And I'd like to avoid problems after I die if I can fix them now. And so we have, in 1550, the Valladolid debate. Valladolid debate. It's the first moral philosophical debate in Europe. And it has a simple question. Should slavery and genocide be allowed? Should be allowed. And there's Las Casas. And Las Casas is there. He shows up and he goes, human rights for everyone. Remember the golden rule. Just look at your Bible. Remember what Jesus says. Jesus is there for everybody. People are people no matter how small. A who is a who no matter how small. People are people no matter how small. Remember the golden rule. Jesus loves everybody. Right? So you have to be king to everybody. And Charles V is like, it's pretty clear, pretty cut and dried, right? I know my Bible. I have my priests. I got my bishop. I got a pope. Las Casas, you make an excellent argument. Jesus, definitely right. And then Sepulveda, Sepulveda, accent on the U, gets up. And he goes, yes. My king, Carlos Rex, Caesar, inheritor of the Roman Empire, yes, you are right. The Bible says all of that. Casas, he ain't lying. Everything he said about Jesus is right. Everything he said about the treatment of these Native Americans and these Africans is true. It is all happening the way he describes it. And it is a terrible thing. I am so sorry that it's happening. But, yes, he's right. The golden rule. Remember the golden rule. But you're entitled to 20% off the top. Every barrel of sugar coming across the ocean. Sugar money is an ocean of cash. Potosi, a mountain in Bolivia, is a literal mountain of silver. Potosi will create in 200 years 180 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver. Or maybe that's not Potosi, that's all of the New World, possibly. I have to remember where I got that statistic from. But Potosi is essentially a literal mountain of silver. And you are entitled to and will be paid 15 to 20% right off the top. And that's not even the taxes of all these people. That's just on the goods that are being bought and sold. You get 15 to 20%. Carlos Rex, Charles V, you could be the greatest king in Europe. You could stop the Protestants. You could defeat the Turks, who are, remember, this is 1550. They just attacked 20 years earlier Vienna. Charles's capital. Charles is now capital in Germany. You can make Europe united again in the first time since Constantine. You can save Christian souls because you can make the African slaves and the Indian Christians and the Indians into Christians. You could save their souls. And you can build a naval armada the world hasn't seen since the Romans. Because they don't know anything about the Ming Navy. Carlos Rex, with all the money coming out, you will go down in history if you want to be. But if you release all those slaves, if you release all those Indians, if you make them all citizens of Spain, the Africans are going to want to go home. The Indians are not going to work on this in the silver mines, and they're definitely not going to work on the sugar plantations. You will have nothing. You'll have this massive empire that creates nothing. And you will be one king among the others. So Carlos Rex, Charles V, decided to not change. There was a moment, and this hurts my soul to say, when we didn't need slavery, when we didn't have to have a genocide of Native Americans, when one man could have just chosen goodness. And then we wouldn't have had the next 500 years of awfulness. It was so new that they were making the rules. And they could have just decided to make new rules. They could have decided just to go back to the Roman way of doing things. That's important. They had a model. The model that they chose was new. They were making it up as they go along. But the old model, the Roman model, was there. That, all right, you have African slaves. You've bought them from Africa. You ship them across the sea. Okay, they stay for a generation, but their children will be free. Their children will be citizens. And will all be equal under the rules, under the law of the Spanish king. The mode was there. The model was there. The rules were there. All you had to do was pick it up. And what they decided to do was invent something completely new. So what justified keeping millions of native and black citizens as slaves? Not citizens, excuse me. Christians as slaves? Racism. Racism, which was totally new, because racism defined your human value not to your culture, which is traditional. You are a Greek or you're not. You are a Roman or you're not. You are a Jew or you're not. You are a Christian or you're not. Right? We think about how the Old Testament divides people, Jew and Gentile. How does Christians divide the world? Christian or pagan? One who believes in one God, Jesus, or one who believes in multiple gods, who doesn't believe in that one God? Pagans. The Romans, you're Roman or you're not. That was culture. Racism ties it to your skin, which is totally new. And this is just massively wrong in 1600. It didn't exist. There's no history anywhere of this. It is a completely new way of dividing people. So what are the effects of racism? 1, it makes slavery natural. Black people deserved it. Why? Because they're darker skinned. Darker skinned people, non-white skinned people, deserved it. Notice it's now not non-Christians the way it was in 1500. It's now non-white people, non-pale people, non-European people. And it's natural. It's not me. I'm not a bad guy. I'm not inventing something new. They're just black. They deserve to be slaves. The second thing that's tied to that is it's obvious. You can look at a person and know their status. See, here's the thing. You can't know if someone's a citizen or not. You can't know if they're a Roman or not, if it's every race and color and creed. You don't know until they take out their little card that says, I'm a Roman. But with racism, you know who a slave is. And you know who a free person is. It's obvious. You just have to look at them. Which means it's 3. It can't change. It's continuous. It's generational. And they are, as enslaved people become, a self-generating caste. They can never be free, which means their children can never be free, which means their ancestors can never be free. So you pay $300 to buy an African enslaved person who was captured in a war in Western Africa, brought to the port, sold at an auction to a European, put on a boat, chained, somehow didn't die on the crossing over, got off the boat, was put on another auction, sold to you for roughly $300, and your great-great-grandchildren were telling that person's great great grandchildren what to do. And not only were they telling them what to do, they could decide if that person lived or died. Whether they were sold off somewhere else, whether you broke up their marriages, whether you sold off their children, that great great grandchild had no more rights hundreds of years later than the person captured in a war in a distant shore. So what happened to the perception of the black body? If the black body is a body to be enslaved, to be made to work, what happens to perceptions of it? And what happens is two things. The first is the black male body becomes dangerous. It becomes a thing to be feared. Because the fear of all slave owners in all of history is the fear of violent revolt. The Spartans are terrified of a Helot revolt because, as I think it's Herodotus that tells us, I don't think it's Thucydides, I think it's Herodotus, says the Helots would like to eat the Spartans raw. That there is so much violence to control that body, that enslaved body, that the slave owner cannot understand the world where they are not consumed by that violence. That they are convinced their slaves, if given the chance, would murder them immediately. Why? Because the slave owner murders their enslaved peoples. This is Leonardo DiCaprio as Mr. Candy in Django Unchained, which is an excellent performance because it makes absolutely no apologies for the violence that Leonardo DiCaprio's Mr. Candy can do and is allowed to do. So violence is justified to control black men. Why? Because the fear that they will revolt, the fear that they are outnumbering the slave owner, and that if you even allow even the thought of freedom in their head, the slave would not be able to be a slave. Because the slave owner can't imagine being a slave. And so it's violence. It's violence. It is unending violence. Because what if you don't want to work that day? What if it's too hot? What if you hurt? What if you sleep in? What if you're too tired? Every ounce of resistance can only be met with violence. There is no negotiating because there are no laws. There are no courts. Roger B. Taney, the head of the Supreme Court, wrote that there was no rights that a black man had that a white man had to respect. That in the United States in the 1850s, a black person could not actually be a person. And notice it says there are no rights, meaning even the right to be left alone, even the right to not be murdered. The most basic of all human rights is the right to not be murdered, is not owed to a black man in America. And the United States would fight a civil war and add amendments to the Constitution and have a complex history after those words are written down. But they were written down, and they were part of legal history and thus cultural history in the United States. And Tony was not weird. He was not out of his mind. He was not some kind of crazy ass go back to the 1500s crazy man. No. He was voicing the common opinion of the culture and the law in 1856. Okay, so what about the black female body? The black female body is sexualized. It's exotic. It's seductive. It's magical. Again, Django Unchained gives us our perfect example. In Mr. Candy's milieu is two black men who are forced to fight to the death against each other as gladiators. Sitting on a couch, watching this happen, is Sheba, a black woman with stylized hair, jewelry, a necklace, an exquisitely handmade dress. And since this is the earliest days of industrialization, this is going to be very expensive, European made, custom made. She's drinking alcohol. She is a slave. She is enslaved by Mr. Candy. What do you think her role, her function is? And he's named her Sheba, the Queen of Sheba from the Bible. A woman who goes and has both questions. She is an equal to Solomon. She is an equal to him, but also a lover as well. What do you think Sheba is? So sexual assault, sexual control of the black female body and the children is fine. It's justified. It's part of the right of being a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson promised his dying wife not to be with another woman. And he kept that promise as far as he's concerned. But he fathered 6 children with Sally Hemings. Six children. He wrote over 1 million words. And Monticello cannot find her proper noun name in any of those 1 million words. It's something like there's a reference that might be her in 3 different places. This is a woman who gave him 6 children. He didn't free her. He didn't free the kids. They were his. He didn't care. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," and then went home and raped Sally Hemings because she was a woman who could not say no. That is our modern definition of rape. She could not say no. Now, there are people, among them black female authors and historians, that have taken a different argument to that it wasn't rape, that she wasn't out of control, that it was actually a romance. You see this especially popping up in the late 60s and the 70s, this argument, because it's a way of saying that Sally Hemings wasn't a thing. She was a person. She had agency. In fact, she chose to stay with Thomas Jefferson instead of getting freedom in France. When Thomas Jefferson was a diplomat in France during the French Revolution, she was technically freed. Slavery was illegal in France for everybody. She was technically freed. All she had to do was stay in France. And she didn't. She went back. Now she had children that she would never see again if she stayed. But, and while I was not there and I am not a historian of Sally Hemings, it can be represented as a choice, as an active choice. And so you will find books written by African American women that play up Sally Hemings's independence, action, even while being a slave. Which makes sense. It makes sense that 150 years later you say, no, she can't be this thing. She was a person. She had thoughts, she had dreams, she had children. So there has to be more to this. The problem is we see none of that from Thomas Jefferson's side. We don't have Sally Hemings' side. And we get nothing from Jefferson. There's just nothing. This woman, who was his wife's half-sister, because Sally Hemings's mother was raped by Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law. So he had 6 children with his black half-sister. And I don't know what to do with that. That is the great question of America, right there. That is the great conundrum. That is the great problem of how does a man who write all men are created equal go home and then clearly not see the woman who is the mother of his children as equal? I don't know what to do with that. I just don't. And so Sally Hemings is the great conundrum of America. This relationship has changed, and historians have changed, and writers have changed, and philosophers have changed as the culture has changed. It has seen this relationship as different, and different groups claim it in different ways at different times. So all I can do is tell you what it looks like now with our current definitions. But there's also this. Sally Hemings was pregnant at least 6 times, if not more. So that means for long periods of time, she was not in a position to have sex. Do you think Thomas Jefferson just went, oh, shucks, guess I'm not having any sex for a couple months? Or are there a whole host of other women who we know nothing about because we're not lucky enough to have their DNA or their family histories? I don't know. Maybe he was loyal to Sally Hemings in the same way he was loyal in his own mind to his wife. Maybe. Maybe he was. I don't know. I know nothing. But also, maybe he wasn't. Because it's fairly common. Very common for women to be used as the sexual possession of the white men of the system. So what happens to African culture in the Americas? It's actually a triumph. It is a triumph against every obstacle. African culture is stomped out. All of these people came from different places, spoke different languages, have different histories, have different foods and different words and different languages. And they are smushed together into something that is black. It's an amalgam of all these African cultures and European culture. And what do we get out of that? A black church, black food, black music, black versions of European languages, which is a willingness to assimilate and innovate. Despite being from innumerable groups, despite at every obstacle thrown at them to keep them from working together, despite the terror and the servitude, the denial of education, black identity dominates the Caribbean and Brazil, where 85% of the slaves went, and it influenced and integrated with the cultures of North America, where 5% of the slaves went. European culture is black. That's the problem with white supremacy. Rock and roll is black music. Barbecue is black food. You go to the grocery store, there's a whole lot of foods that you eat that are black folk foods, cooked in black folk ways, that white folk took on. There is such a mixture, despite the racism, despite the violence, physical and sexual and cultural, despite all that. It is a triumph that most of the Western world is influenced in art, in letters, in language, in music, in food, in our own DNA, in the air in our lungs, and the blood in our veins, with modern African descendants. Thank you. If you're still there, I appreciate that, and I am so sorry. Please be safe. You are valuable. And that's really what the triumph of the end of this lecture is, that despite everything that can be thrown at people, individually and as a group, you can survive and succeed. And that very survival is in itself your success. Be safe. Bye.